The suburbs may have now been saved. Now look, the head of Housing and Urban Development has scrapped an Obama administration zoning policy that created a type of equity-based program that all localities had to follow. And this was something Trump had said would destroy suburbs. He has now scrapped that whole thing. And also in other news, Homeland Security has repurposed the CBP-1 app, the one that used to be able to facilitate mass deportations and importations. Now people can use it to deport themselves. Now look, this was the app formerly people could use it to schedule illegal entry into the United States, now reversed purpose. And meanwhile, 83% of USAID programs have been canceled by Secretary of State and Acting USAID Director Marco Rubio. And also, in a court ruling, the Chinese Communist Party has been ordered to pay $24 billion to Missouri over its COVID-19 policies, in particular like hoarding equipment. I'll be talking more about these topics and a lot more. Let's jump into it. Now, first off, a policy that could have brought an end to American suburbs, at least according to Trump, has now been scrapped. Now, look, the zoning policy started under Barack Obama. Later, Biden brought it back. Trump briefly stalled it during his first term in office. But this created a type of equity program that localities all across the country had to follow. And this program has now been eliminated by Housing and Urban Development, HUD, Secretary Scott Turner. New York Post said this: Housing and Urban Development, HUD, Secretary Scott Turner announced the elimination Wednesday of a costly Obama and Biden-era federal zoning rule that President Trump warned would destroy suburban neighborhoods nationwide. It notes the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, AFFH rule, had conditioned millions of dollars worth of community development block grants from HUD on the completion of lengthy demographic analysis. Everything was race and gender and who knows what else. It says to get the money, localities had to certify that there were no disparities, either by race, religion, sex, nationality, or disability. Do you have enough midgets in your neighborhood? It notes that in access to parks, transportation hubs, schools, and business districts, among other stipulations. It was global equity, folks. Now, look, Secretary Turner said in a HUD press release that local and state governments understand the needs of their communities much better than bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Terminating this rule, he says, restores trust in local communities and property owners while protecting America's suburbs and neighborhood integrity. It notes as well that Trump had terminated the program in 2020 during his first term in office. Biden restored the policy, and now Trump is ending it again. Secretary Turner goes on to explain that, quote, by terminating the AFFH rule, localities will no longer be required to complete onerous paperwork and drain their budgets to comply with the extreme and restrictive demands made up by the federal government. And he adds, quote, we are aware of communities that have been neglected or negatively impacted due to the demands of the recent AFFH rules. Returning to the law as written will advance market-driven development and allow American neighborhoods to flourish. Now, look, in other news, the Trump administration has a new service for illegal immigrants. They're launching something for all the illegals in the country. The Department of Homeland Security has now repurposed the CBP-1 app. Now, you might remember in the past you could download this app, you could schedule an appointment, and if you're in Guatemala or Mexico, wherever else, sometimes they would actually fly you into the United States, or you could just walk across the border, submit yourself to the authorities, and get on that gravy train of all these policies, right? They've now reversed that app, and now you can use that app to self-deport. Fox News said this: the Trump administration is rolling out a new app to replace the controversial CBP-1 app with a new replacement designed to facilitate the self-deportation of illegal immigrants. The Department of Homeland Security is announcing the CBP Home app, different, not the CBP-1 app, the CBP Home app, Go Home, which will launch with a self-deportation reporting feature for those in the country illegally. Remember, they're now legally required to report themselves also. We'll get into that in a bit. But basically, it says this replaces the CBP-1 app, which was expanded by the Biden administration to allow migrants, illegal immigrants, to schedule appointments at points of entry to be paroled into the U.S. Hundreds of thousands were paroled into the U.S. as a result. More than that, actually. The Trump administration has ended the ability to use the app for that purpose. It notes that all CBP-1 apps will be updated with the new CBP Home app. So if you have this on your phone, you have a new version of it. It notes, quote, the Biden administration exploited the CBP-1 app to allow more than 1 million aliens to illegally enter the United States. With the launching of the CBP Home app, we are restoring integrity to our immigration system. And that's DHS Secretary Kristi Noem saying this in a statement. Now notes the app allows aliens to, quote, submit intent to depart and submit information regarding their intent to leave the U.S. And it notes they can also provide information to verify they have left the U.S., a function limited to those who were paroled into the U.S. So if you used it before, you can use it again, but for a different purpose. Now, this is an interesting move because it could potentially use kind of the same systems already in place. Just do the opposite of what it used to do. Under the old program, people, any country on earth basically, they could schedule illegal entry to the U.S. You could become an alien, right? Maybe, depending on how you define it, not an illegal alien, but an alien. You go through a program with DHS to get on the parole system or the amnesty system. And once you're on that, you become eligible for free airplane flights, free bus rides, free services that were given to illegal immigrants, like free housing and free food and free cars and free everything else, free health care, all across the country. And now that exact same massive network setup is doing the opposite. It is facilitating them leaving the country if they so choose. Now, look, on that point, remember what Trump did right before this. The Trump administration, they've allegedly been having a tough time carrying out the mass deportations that were promised on the campaign trail. Now, they've been focusing mainly on the so-called, worst of the worst, the gangs like MS-13, Tren de Aragua, but they've also alleged that one of the reasons why deportations are actually not particularly high right now, it's actually even less than the Biden administration, is that the system for deportations was gutted by the Biden administration, they claim at least. And there are also legal protections in place, and also other barriers preventing the operations from meeting the scale that a lot of us were expecting. It's not really happening right now. It's happening to an extent, but not nearly at the scale that people thought it was. Obama was more aggressive on deportations. But look, the push for self-deportations could potentially help expand this. The important context here is that the Trump administration recently made a requirement for all aliens. That's not just illegal immigrants, that's all aliens, which means if they were on the parole system, if they're on the amnesty gravy train, all aliens have to register with the federal government. And registering can put them up for deportation, right? If they fail to register, not only do they face deportation, but they also face fines and criminal charges. So, there is some additional pressure in place for the deportations. And look, if you're an individual here illegally, you don't want to become a criminal and then be barred from the U.S. for the next, decade or two, you might want to do it. And of course, they have an app now set up for that. Now look, folks, on a different topic, in a turn of world events, Justin Trudeau is now the former Canadian Prime Minister. He's out. And the next Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has come out swinging against the United States. Canada, under the new leader, is now vowing, with the tariffs now going back and forth, that Canada will win the trade war against Donald J. Trump. BBC said this. Mark Carney has won the race to succeed Justin Trudeau as Canada's Prime Minister, vowing to win the trade war with the U.S. and with President Donald Trump. They're going to come out on top. The goose will honk upon the eagle. And it's the former governor of the Canadian Central Bank and Bank of England beat 3 rivals in the Liberal Party's leadership contest in a landslide. In much of his victory speech, Carney, 59, attacked Trump, who has imposed tariffs on Canada and said he wants to make the country the 51st U.S. state. Trump said that. He noted that, quote, Americans should make no mistake, in trade, as in hockey, Canada will win. And them's are fighting words. Now, notice that Carney is expected to be sworn in the coming days and will lead the Liberals in the next general election, which could be called in the coming weeks. Now, let me show you a bit of what Mark Carney's speech in relation to the U.S. looked like. Watch this.
America is not Canada. And Canada never, ever will be part of America in any way, shape, or form. We didn't ask for this fight. But Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves. So the Americans, they should make no mistake, in trade as in hockey, Canada will win. We are stronger when we're united. We can give ourselves far, far more than Donald Trump can ever take away.
Now, as a bit of context to this, Justin Trudeau, he was removed as the head of Canada's Liberal Party. Mark Carney, he's taking over the role of Prime Minister just until the next elections, and those are coming up very soon. So this is actually temporary unless they win the election in Canada. Now, it's been projected the Liberal Party is really kind of set to lose to Canada's Conservative Party. We will see, because the trade war is becoming popular in Canada, and the Liberals are taking a strong stance against the U.S. on that. Canadians, they seem to like seeing their country stand up against, Trump's tariffs. And this is going to be something popular with votes. This can affect the Canadian elections. And it just might work out, right, as long as the Liberal Party does not lose the trade war or make things worse for Canada before the elections, which Trump is now saying is going to happen. By the way, we'll get into that in a bit. But first, on that point, Canada has taken a very strong stance, some very strong measures in the tariff war, and this includes the rolling out of one of their biggest threats. They are threatening to shut down parts of the American electric grid, at least impact it. The Premier of Ontario, that's Doug Ford, announced during a press conference on Monday that the province will be charging 25% more for the electricity that it provides to the states of New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. Watch.
We'll keep up the fight. We will apply maximum pressure to maximize our leverage. That's why today we're moving forward with a 25% surcharge on electricity exports. For the 1.5 million American homes and businesses that Ontario powers, homes and businesses in Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. This surcharge will cost families and businesses in these states up to $400,000 each and every single day. On an average, this will add around $100 per month to the bills of hardworking Americans. Let me be clear, I will not hesitate to increase this charge. If necessary, if the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely. Believe me when I say I do not want to do this. I feel terrible for the American people because it's not the American people who started this trade war. It's one person who's responsible. That's President Trump.
This could really escalate because Ford is noting he will not hesitate to increase the surcharge or even shut the electricity off completely for parts of the U.S. And on this point, Trump recently enacted his promised 25% tariffs against Mexico and Canada. This likewise included an additional 10% tariff on China on top of what was there before. Both Canada and Mexico, they're following the U.S. on tariffs on China, and the Chinese regime has likewise enacted 100% tariffs on many Canadian goods. A lot of intertwining tariffs here. But back to what's happening now between Canada and the United States. Right now, currently, the U.S. relies pretty heavily on Canadian timber, oil, and energy. The United States is also looking to become fully independent on all three of these fronts, meaning it could decimate the Canadian economy. Now, Trump is also saying that he will match the retaliatory tariffs from any country, including Canada, with reciprocal tariffs. So this means that if Canada enacts 25% tariffs against the United States, Trump could potentially double the tariffs on Canada. Now, on that point, Trump just announced this morning he's going to do that. Trump just announced he is going to basically double the tariffs, or even more in some areas. This includes the steel industry. He's threatening the highest tariffs in the world on steel against Canada. He's also saying that in their threats to shut down parts of the American electric grid, I talked about it before, Trump enacted a national emergency on energy. He's going to use that. And if you have a national emergency, it means the president can basically use anything to secure that industry. He is saying that Canada also, he will completely and even permanently cut off their entire automotive industry. So basically, Trump is threatening right now country-destroying tariffs on Canada. And he's saying that Canada will say, "Oh, Canada," but they will say it as part of the United States. He actually said that. Now, look, of course, Trump is also offering Canada, Mexico, and others a way out. They can avoid paying tariffs if they move their companies to the United States. Canada, with what Trump is saying right now, not all of that may be on the table anymore. It's not clear. He is threatening major, not even just tariffs, but even cutting off markets with Canada. He is threatening things against Canada right now that will decimate their country. But to that point, already a lot of companies are looking to do this, to move to the United States. A lot of Canadian companies were already observing this even before the tariffs went into action. And so there is movement on that front. Now we'll see how Trump maintains this, or whether he does. Canada is, of course, one of the closest allies of the United States in destroying their economy. There are arguments on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe we can take it out in a hockey match. Who knows, right? But look, folks, on a different topic, Trump is now looking to fast-track the deportation of people engaging in things like what they call anti-Semitism on American campuses. And he actually took actions on this recently, declaring Shalom Hamas, saying that shalom means hello and goodbye, and they could choose which one they want. He said the terror organization, if they do not release the remaining Israeli hostages, that means goodbye. And he promised, in that case, to aggressively destroy the organization completely in that case. And on this point, Trump followed that up with a statement to Columbia University, right here in New York. And in a White House statement, he said, "Shalom, Columbia," in response to the university allowing these large-scale protests that actually included many threats and harassment of Jewish students. The White House said this, "Shalom, Columbia. The Trump admin, led by USAID government, U.S. Department of Education, and the task force to combat anti-Semitism, which they now have in place, that's the Justice Department, HHS, USGSA, has canceled $400 million in federal grants to Columbia University over its failure to protect Jewish students from anti-Semitic harassment." They've actually now expanded this threat to universities all across the country. If they allow people to be attacked, harassed, have death threats or terroristic threats against their family members, well, the universities could lose their federal money. And in addition to this, the Trump administration is also now working to deport any person if they're not an American citizen, but even potentially if they're a U.S. permanent resident who has been involved with these types of protests. Any individual who supports Hamas now faces deportation. Now, they've started doing this. There's some very strong pushback from the Democrats on it, but let's get into it. New York Post said this first off. It said, President Trump is giving this anti-Israel campus rabble-rouser a ticket to study abroad for good. A Palestinian activist who led a coalition of twisted radicals seeking the total eradication of Western civilization, and that's an exact quote, responsible for riotous protests at Columbia University and Barnard College, has been arrested by ICE agents, according to his lawyer. Columbia University apartheid divest leader Mahmoud Khalil, who completed his graduate studies at Columbia in December, also potentially faces having his visa revoked and his green card canceled following Trump's crackdown on unrest at colleges. attorney Amy Greer said Sunday. It notes this was inside his university-owned apartment a few blocks from the Ivy League campus Saturday night when ICE agents entered and took him into custody, Greer said. And despite graduating months ago, Khalil, who earned his undergraduate degree in Beirut, still lived in school, provided housing due to a policy allowing students to remain on campus after graduating, a source told the Post. So he's living on a college campus at the school paid by that. And apparently he can do it. It notes he has remained active in recent disruptive protests, including last week's takeover of the Milstein Library at Barnard College. Videos and photographs posted on X depict him holding a bullhorn near the library entrance and engaged in discussion, that's a nice way to put it, with school administrators. Now, on that point, there's very strong pushback right now to prevent him from being deported. Democrats are actually circling the wagons on this right now. They're trying to stop his deportation. They're in a funny place because a lot of Jewish voters used to be Democrat. I don't know if it's still the case or not. A lot of the big money as well. But basically, as we speak right now, official statements from the Democrat Party, they're trying to prevent his deportation. They're saying, of course, this is freedom of speech. You have the right to protest at American campuses. This is something that's been enshrined since the civil rights era. And they're saying that sometimes, yes, protests can be, politically divisive, but it is protected speech. And they're also arguing, since this individual is a U.S. permanent resident, you technically can't deport them this easily. Now, there are other arguments saying this individual has promised to, or at least has the goal of his organization, to destroy, quote unquote, eradicate Western civilization, that this individual's organization has been making threats, death threats, fighting with even Jewish students on the campuses, and that, again, their open support for terrorist organizations like Hamas kind of makes them look a bit bad. Now, we'll see which side wins. It's a very odd battle right now. The Democrats are very heavily defending this individual. Republicans are very much pushing for his deportation. That's kind of the battle right now. We will see how it unfolds. Speaking of these big protests, Americans have been finding out that our tax dollars have actually helped finance many of the organizations that were kind of running these things by proxy. We found out we were funding a lot of the NGOs, a lot of the nonprofit organizations that were running a lot of the major protests all around the country, that we were funding the open border operations by proxy of the NGOs and government programs, that they were paying the radical protest organizations burning down your local neighborhood and maybe threatening your family, and also funding all the gender and race politics programs in your schools, in your neighborhoods, in your business, and also all around the world, including things like sex changes for animals. And now it also seems most of that is coming to an end. USAID was recently moved under the State Department. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is now also the acting director of USAID. And Rubio has now announced the cancellation of the overwhelming majority of contracts for USAID. Most of it is gone. This is Marco Rubio on X. He said, after a 6-week review, we are officially canceling 83% of the programs at USAID. The 5,200 contracts that are now canceled spent tens of billions of dollars in ways that did not serve, and in some cases even harmed, the core national interests of the United States. In consultation with Congress, we intend for the remaining 18% of programs we are keeping, approximately 1,000, to now be administered more effectively under the State Department. And he adds, thank you to DOGE and our hardworking staff who worked very long hours to achieve this overdue and historic reform. Now, look, according to the State Department spokesperson, Tammy Bruce, we could potentially be getting a list of all the contracts that were just terminated, over 5,000 contracts. And look, she also noted that the level of alleged wrongdoing they discovered is, quote unquote, troubling. Watch this.
The level of what we've discovered at USAID is troubling enough to where this is the kind of conversation that is perhaps going to have to be had by the American people and even perhaps Congress. But I think at this point, when we're looking at this kind of an issue that we see through our existing investigations and inquiries, that we've clearly got some problems. And so we're determined to correct those problems.
Now, to this point, the Trump administration has enacted a policy of what they call radical transparency. They're saying the American people will be given details on any program canceled through DOGE or through the other investigations now taking place. And we'll likely get to see just what those 5,200 contracts that were canceled were actually for. And we might also get more details on what the 1,000 remaining programs are for. Because again, not everything under USAID was crazy. There were some good things under it, and there were arguments that were valid on that. It seems to be the case that they've identified maybe 1,000 good programs and 5,200 they say were not good. Now look, on this point as well, it seems that many of the cancellations and firings we're seeing in the federal government were tied to programs on DEI and ESG, diversity, equity, and inclusion, meaning race and gender politics, and ESG, environmental and social governance, identity politics / environmental policies. And among Trump's actions were executive orders basically ending government involvement in these various programs. And so this has been used as one of the key foundations of ending a lot of the budgets for these groups, firing key people who were working on these programs, and just getting rid of entire programs and everything tied to them, including entire government departments. And the issue is now, it's being revealed just how broad these programs had in fact become. These things were a major part of our country. Maybe we sensed it, but now we're getting a clearer picture. Fox said this: a study published this week details the degree to which the Biden administration infused DEI policies into the federal government in a report the authorities can say serve as a resource for the Trump administration to continue to identify and quote-unquote destroy the practice. It says the new study conducted by the Functional Government Initiative and the Center for Renewing America identified 460 programs across 24 government agencies in the Biden administration that diverted resources to DEI initiatives. Now, some of you might be saying, well, 460 programs, that's not massive. Only 24 government agencies, there's a few hundred of them. What does that mean? Well, let me show you what that means. They say, quote, at least $1 trillion of taxpayer money was infused with DEI principles, the study states. $1 trillion was being used on this. It says the study lays out DEI infusion across several federal agencies, including the Defense Department's plan to integrate environmental economic justice tools into training, FEMA's need to instill equity as the foundation of emergency management, which maybe we saw in action where it's now been proven that you had FEMA workers refusing to serve and help Trump supporters if they saw Trump banners out in front of their yards. And also the Labor Department's push to, quote, embed equity in a sustainable manner that recognizes the multiple and overlapping identities held by workers. And those can be any kind of identity you can imagine, apparently. Now, look, folks, on this budget, that is massive. At least $1 trillion, at least. And just to put that in perspective, right, because we hear these monies so much, $10 billion here, $100 billion there, and at this point we're like, is that it? Only a few $1 billion? Look, the border wall, what was it, like $5 billion, and Congress tried blocking it Trump's entire first term in office? To make this clear, what $1 trillion is, in fiscal year 2024, the federal government, their entire spending, was $6.9 trillion. $6.9 trillion. Every dollar paid in taxes, every time you go and file your taxes every year, in 2024, they collected about $4.92 trillion in taxes. 4.92. The amount of money that was only being spent on DEI programs was about 1/7 of the entire federal government budget. About 1/7 of the entire budget. It was about half of the overspending. You know, we're told we're going into debt. About half of that debt was just for DEI. But look, also on that point, it makes it a lot easier for Doge and Trump to cancel those programs and that spending, given the executive orders he has enacted against DEI. And that's probably not even the end of it. That doesn't even include other forms of what they call waste or otherwise. But look, folks, in other news, the Chinese Communist Party just lost a major court case over its role in the COVID-19 pandemic. And they now have to pay the state of Missouri $24 billion. That's right, $24 billion to Missouri. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a 1-minute break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party just lost a major court case right here in the United States over its role in the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in the early days of the outbreak, when the communist regime was telling the world everything's under control, don't worry, do not lock down. If you ban flights from China, you're a racist. Remember they were saying that? And when inside China, the CCP was banning domestic travel, you couldn't travel inside China, but you could leave the country. Remember that? And they were locking people in their homes and everything else, and they told the World Health Organization, everything's fine and dandy. Make sure nobody locks down travel from China. Remember that? Now, the regime, while this was happening, launched another program. While all of this was going on, the CCP began using its global spy networks, the Tongs and fraternal organizations and front groups, to use them to buy up all global protective equipment. And then it used that equipment, that monopoly it had, as a tool for diplomacy while threatening to even throw the United States, they said, into the deep sea of the coronavirus. Remember, they threatened the United States on that during that time. And now with all these years going by, the Chinese Communist Party is finally being held liable for all of this. The CCP was sued in Missouri, and the Chinese Communist Party now has to pay the state of Missouri $24 billion. And if they don't pay, well, Missouri is saying they can seize Chinese Communist Party assets. Let me show you this. This is the Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey. He said, quote, "Hey, China, you owe Missouri $24 billion. I just won a judgment in court. Pay up or we start seizing assets and farmland." All that valuable CCP farmland they're getting, well, that could be passed right back to the state of Missouri. And so we'll see if they get to hold it, right? Now, here's some more details on the case as well from the Epoch Times. It said a Missouri judge has found China's communist leadership liable in a multi-billion-dollar case over the regime's hoarding of medical supplies during the COVID-19 pandemic. The judgment found the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, was liable for $24 billion in damages to Missouri for exacerbating the pandemic by obstructing U.S. access to medical supplies. It says the state of Missouri brought the case against China, its communist leadership, and several subordinate departments and institutions, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where some intelligence leaders believe that the COVID-19 virus originated. You heard it here first, by the way. District Judge Stephen Limbach Jr. rendered the decision by default after officials from the CCP did not appear to plead their side in the case. a common outcome in cases dealing with foreign entities. It notes the judgment took particular care to underscore the CCP's role in obfuscating information about the virus early on during the initial outbreak in China, as well as the regime's efforts to hoard personal protective equipment, causing shortages in the United States. Remember, folks, we actually had the genome released of the virus. Do you remember that? Medical journals reported on it. There were public reports on it. Then the Chinese Communist Party disappeared the guy who published it, and then all the medical journals suddenly repealed all of their findings on it. Why did that happen? Well, maybe CCP pressure. Now, on this front, calls for investigations like this had begun in the early days of the pandemic, but the Chinese Communist Party basically shut that all down using diplomatic threats and even sanctioning foreign officials. They were threatening to destroy the economies of some countries, including Australia. Investigations were stonewalled, and eventually the censorship apparatus, even here in the United States, worked to silence anyone and just about everyone who brought it up. And remember, the World Health Organization, there was the pandemic. They also declared the infodemic, the information pandemic, justifying mass global censorship. And yes, organizations right here in the United States enforced these policies of mass global censorship. But now things are different. New investigations are underway, and so far they've been confirming what some of us have been saying all along this entire time. That yes, the virus originated in China. Yes, the CCP did everything it possibly could to cover it up. The CCP lied to the entire world about it, even using its international ties with like the World Health Organization to do it, and also manipulated several big tech companies to help them censor everybody. And also several global powers colluded with the Chinese Communist Party on that entire effort. Now, folks, that said, we'll probably get a lot more answers on this. More is coming up. Hit the like button, leave a comment or question, and let's jump into some questions. All right, first question up from Ashley from California. You're saying, is there an incentive to self-deport, or are we relying on people to, quote, do the right thing? There's a moderate incentive to self-deport. Okay, so on the self-deportation side, I mentioned that Trump has now repurposed the CBP-1 app. It's now called the CBP Home app. And rather than facilitating mass migration to the U.S., it can now facilitate mass, basically self-deportations from the U.S. to wherever you came from. The incentive is this. Trump has created now a requirement where all aliens, not even just illegal immigrants, because the language here is important, right? Now, if you're an illegal immigrant, it means that you illegally entered the country. Basically your presence in the country is a crime, right? You are committing a crime by your very presence here. That is an illegal immigrant. There's a big gray area that has been created because of the way the Biden administration handled most of this. The way they did it was this. They made it so that people who came to the U.S. were not really defined as criminals. They became quote-unquote migrants, right? They had, of course, the CBP-1 app and other programs that would give them parole, meaning they had pseudo-legal amnesty. That was basically how it worked. They were given what was effectively pseudo-amnesty. Many others, they were even coached on this by the NGOs on how to do it. They would come across, they'd say, I believe my life is in danger, I need amnesty here. A lot of them were defrauding the system because they were discarding their ID cards. I personally witnessed this. I was in Mexico. If you go to the Mexican side of the Rio Grande, the ground is covered. I'm not even exaggerating, covered in discarded ID cards, discarded passports, discarded travel documents. And the reason they do that is because they're defrauding the amnesty system. It is massively common because basically if you're from certain countries, you can get amnesty. Other countries are not eligible for that. And so a lot of them were lying. They were lying to American authorities about which country they actually came from. And because there was no way to confirm their identities, basically they all got on the books. Organizations on the gravy train trail leading to the U.S. even coached them, teach them how to do this. And so what happened was this. We ended up with 7, 10, maybe more million illegal immigrants. Many of them were under a pseudo-legal system because of the way the Biden administration set this up. And because of that, the definition of illegal alien versus migrant versus just alien was very complicated. And so now the Trump administration, they're saying that all aliens, not even just illegal aliens, but all aliens, need to register or face criminal charges. That means that all those people, regardless of the gray area, regardless of anything else, they have to register. They have to tell the government, I'm here, this is my name, this is where I'm from. They have to go through a process. If they fail to do that, they will be committing a crime. And what that means basically now is if an individual is arrested and they're like, well, you didn't register, they are now criminals. They have committed an additional crime on top of whatever else was there, regardless of the status, whether it's gray area, whether it's full illegal immigrant, or whether they had some type of protection status. If they fail to register, they are then committing an additional crime, which can fast-track their deportation. So what they did was a very interesting move, actually, the Trump administration. Now, as for the illegal immigrants or aliens, depending on how you want to define it, a lot of them, they're probably not going to go anywhere. I know a lot of them are not going to go anywhere. You don't really see a lot of it changing. And I think the argument for them is this. What are you going to do about it, Trump? What are you going to do about it? You have what? Under the Biden administration, estimates of 7 to 10 million people. Prior to that, you had an estimated at least 11 million illegal immigrants. That some people put the number as high as like 30 million. If you're dealing with major cities like New York, you're talking like 400,000 illegal immigrants. What are they deporting? Like a few hundred a day? I mean, it's not that much. And I think the argument is they believe they can basically get legal protections, they can challenge it, they can get protection from the local government. There's all these different nonprofit organizations guarding them from deportations. And I believe a lot of them, because of that messaging and because of the programs in place, they believe that Trump cannot win. They believe, I think, that the legal systems, the activist organizations, the Democrat Party, they're strong enough to effectively defend them against these policies. And what they're being told, even by Democratic leadership, AOC, others who are talking in other media, that they're being told that what Trump is doing is not legal. They're being told that Trump has no authority to do this. They're being told that they're in the right, that they're entitled to this even. And so, they're hearing these two messages. And keep in mind, a lot of them, they may not speak English. If you go to their languages and the outlets of information they have access to, there are, Spanish newspapers and there are Spanish radio shows. They don't really have a lot of conservative ones. They're mostly like Democrat aligned, meaning the messaging they're getting is almost completely within that echo chamber. And because of that, the message they're hearing is do not comply, do not work with them. They cannot legally deport you. If they knock on your door, don't answer. They have no legal right to kick your door down and arrest you. And you see them doing that. And that's why Tom Homan and the Department of Homeland Security and others, they're saying that these people are guilty of effectively teaching or coaching illegal immigrants on how to avoid law enforcement. They're saying they're going to criminally charge them. We're not really seeing that happen either. Not yet, at least, although there's talk about it. And that's kind of where the debate is. So I personally do not believe most of them are going to comply with this. Not unless the Trump administration takes a very strong move. Now, the other side of this the Trump administration can still do a lot more. And one of the biggest things that they could do is something they have not yet done, which is, all right, how many of you remember in the United States when it used to be illegal to hire an illegal immigrant? How many of you remember this? That used to be law in the United States. In the United States, if you were in a business and you hired an illegal immigrant, you, as a business owner, committed a crime. You could face punishment for it. You could go to jail for it. Now, the Trump administration could bring that back. They've not yet done that. But that would absolutely decimate things. And that would very likely cause people to self-deport. Because what happens when you can no longer make money? What happens when you no longer have access to free housing and free food and free everything else? Well, you have two choices. You either become a career criminal, which is probably not a good idea right now either, or you download that CBP One app and get a free flight home to wherever you come from. What are you going to do? If Trump brings back that policy, I do believe you will see massive self-deportations. And the other argument for it too, folks, is, look, we're just a little over a month into Trump's term in office. It has not been that long. We're barely a month in. About half of Trump's appointees are still being confirmed. They're not even in office yet. The Congress has not yet confirmed about half of Trump's nominees. Let that sink in. He doesn't even have his full administration in place, let alone the problems they're having within the agencies, the government agencies, which they seem to believe are not fully cooperative with the current administration, as again they're launching investigations and basically purging the government right now, whichever side you agree with on that. And so I do believe you're going to see probably the reintroduction of some of these policies. In addition to criminalizing the hiring of illegal immigrants, which would also apply if you go to Home Depot and you pick up some workers outside. I'm sure you've all seen, that's a big thing they do. They have a lot of illegal immigrant workers outside who, offer to basically do construction for you. Even picking them up would be you committing a crime were they to bring that law back. The other side is they could make identity theft illegal. It's unfortunately no secret. A lot of illegal immigrants, they steal Social Security numbers. They get fraudulent driver's licenses, fraudulent ID cards, fraudulent permanent resident cards. It's extremely common, so common that nobody does anything about it. And if Trump were to basically go after them for that, that would mean that, identity theft committed by illegal immigrants or the falsification of documents, which is a very big crime. If they were to charge them for this criminally, you might see a lot of people self-deport before facing those charges, because I would believe a massive number of them have committed that crime. Because again, it's been relatively tolerated for them to do it until, well, as we speak. As we speak, it is still relatively tolerated for them to do that. It's just kind of the way things were done. Another question here from Seymour Butts. You're saying, Josh, if Trump is going to release the JFK files, why can't he just go ahead and tell us what they say? A simple, oh yes, LBJ did it with the CIA, and that's all we need to know. I think it's because he'd sound like a conspiracy theorist. I think that Trump, it would be the most effective path for him to just release the files. The problem is he's being stonewalled by the FBI. And I'm not just saying that as an accusation. If you remember, during Trump's first term in office, Trump ordered the release of the JFK files. The FBI refused to do it. After there was a bit of back and forth, Trump was advised to not release them. And, it was momentarily very contentious. And then the unfortunate short-term memory that a lot of us have because of the crazy news cycles these days kicked in, and a lot of people just kind of forgot about it. Things that are contentious tend to not stay contentious for very long. The Epstein files are the big ones right now. The FBI, the DOJ, they are now saying they're going to release them. DOJ is saying they were prevented from releasing them because Southern District of New York was effectively, they claim, concealing these documents from the Department of Justice. FBI went in there, Kash Patel, DOJ went in there, they retrieved the quote-unquote truckloads, they say, quote-unquote truckloads of documents on Jeffrey Epstein. They now claim they have them, they're reviewing them, and they're working to release them. Now, I've seen a lot of back and forth. There are some, even among conservatives, criticizing the DOJ right now, saying, you promised it, where is it? And I would argue this is a continuation of the amount of distrust that has been developed, especially among conservatives, with, unfortunately, many government agencies because of what happened over the last, 4+ years. Maybe the last decade, because if you go back to Trump's first term, a lot of these problems are there as well. Americans have developed, at least among conservatives, they've developed a very, very severe distrust of these agencies. Now, Kash Patel, for his part, I personally know Kash. I think he's a fantastic guy. He came out publicly and he basically said this. He said that he believes, it was in a tweet just recently, he said he believes that as a matter of restoring trust, the FBI needs to do this. He said he is currently in communication with members of Congress, mainly conservatives, who are requesting this information, and he is working very hard to get this information released. Kash says in his public statement that he believes this is necessary, not just for an act of integrity of the government, but for an act of restoring the trust that has been broken with the American people. And I would actually agree with that. I believe the only way, because this has become such a big issue, the only way they can restore trust right now is with transparency. And I believe that the release of these documents can achieve that personally. James, you're asking, does Kash still do a podcast on ET? No, I mean, look, we're a nonprofit. He's a government official now, so we can't really continue that. But you can still watch it. Kash Patel had a show with us called Kash's Corner. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. Kash is fantastic. He did a really good job with that show. Another question here, California guy, you're saying, yeah, but will China really pay? You're talking about the court case they just lost with Missouri. You're saying, will China really pay? I doubt it. Can California sue? Okay, 2 points on that. Will China pay? Probably not. But will Missouri seize assets from China to force them to pay? Probably. Will the Chinese Communist Party retaliate if they seize the assets of the CCP? Probably. Will that make relations with the US and China worse? Probably. And so it's not a very smart move right now. The Chinese Communist Party has become extremely aggressive. They're becoming very hostile. And I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record here. They've been attacking us openly. We just found out that, for example, the DOJ, they just indicted about a dozen Chinese hackers and government officials for launching cyber attacks. It turns out they were attacking us. The interesting thing, though, is, look, if you're a tyrannical government and you're trying to silence dissidents, you probably want to keep it in that bubble. The CCP is even threatening U.S. elected officials who've defended us. They're making bomb threats against the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., Chinese agents. They're making bomb threats and threatening elected officials because Shen Yun Performing Arts is there and they don't like Shen Yun. They're using their spies in really aggressive ways right now. In my opinion, look, I don't like being targeted by them. It honestly does stress me out a little bit sometimes, especially when it comes to this type of stuff. But at the same time, what they're doing is massively stupid. They're behaving extremely stupidly. They're acting like massive idiots because they're overplaying their hand. I'm not just name calling. They're overplaying their hand. They're doing things so aggressively that it's becoming obvious. And they're basically exposing all their networks right now. On that front, I'd point to this. They're probably going to retaliate against the United States on trade because they have this, wolf warrior diplomacy, they call it, where they suddenly think they're like action heroes and they can go and attack anybody who criticizes them. They're not as strong as they think they are. They're not cool. You know what I mean? They think they are. And every time they do this kind of stuff, they just get backhanded, and I think they're going to get backhanded. Really. Just wait for it. They're not as strong as they try to make themselves seem to be. They're not doing something smart right now. And you also ask, can California sue them? Yes. Not only can California sue them, but other countries can sue them. And I do believe we will probably see similar lawsuits from other U.S. states against the CCP, even in terms of recovering COVID money, recovering the costs of COVID. They could basically go after the CCP for that. Remember, during the pandemic, there were countries talking about that. You had Australia talking about it. You had European countries talking about it. You had a lot of countries talking about it. The CCP reacted to that by sanctioning government officials in various countries around the world. Again, wolf warrior diplomacy, because they think they're like action heroes. You know what I mean? They think they can go around bullying everyone right now. But they don't have the power to back it up. They don't have the muscles to back up that kind of behavior. You know what I mean? They don't have it. And so it's going to backfire on them. And I would argue it is already backfiring on them. Let's see. Angel Bombach 1, you're saying, doesn't George Soros, own the Spanish language TV programs? I'm not sure about TV. So George Soros, his organization, bought up one of the big radio networks, which includes, I can't remember the exact number, it was like 200 or around that, Spanish language radio stations. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, under the Biden administration, fast-tracked that. The current FCC chair under Trump is actually currently investigating the actions of the previous FCC and why they fast-tracked that right before the 2024 elections. Because remember, the context of George Soros buying up this massive network of Spanish language radio stations, that came on the heels of public polling, which showed that a lot of Spanish-speaking Americans, Mexican Americans, whatever else, that they were voting for Trump. They were becoming Trump supporters, right? They were becoming Trump supporters. And so a lot of, the Democrat establishment, they were saying, well, how do we stop this? How do we unbrainwash Latinos? I mean, Latin X's. I'm sorry, I don't mean to misgender all of you Latin X's out there. Latin X, I'm joking, right? I've never met a Latino who likes being called that, by the way. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. I really don't know why they thought that was a good idea. But to that point, there was basically a battle for information. And so this was important because right before the elections, they had to try to win back the Latino vote. And so it looked like the FCC fast-tracked George Soros and his acquisition of the purchase of these radio stations, which had to be government approved, and made it happen by basically jumping a lot of hurdles that you can't normally jump over. They are currently investigating whether crimes were committed or rules were broken through that action. The FCC, as we speak, is investigating that. On the point of on the point of TV stations, I have a lot of friends in different Latin American countries. The problem we have with TV stations in a lot of Latin American countries is they're owned basically by the same corporate structures as the American corporate media. Even though you might have them under different names in different countries, most of these countries do not have the type of independent media we have in the US. And so they have an echo chamber when it comes to mass media. They don't really have things outside of it. I talk to friends in Brazil, for example. One of the problems they have too, and look, this is what I've been told by them, is because they have unfortunately very high illiteracy rates in a lot of these countries. Because of that, video is where a lot of people get their news. Video and radio, not so much printed media, right? Because they can hear it, of course, but their literacy rates are not fantastic. And so what happens is if you have video and radio being the two main ways people can get any type of information, you can regulate that. You can regulate airwaves. And so it's very hard to break through that. They do not even have access in a lot of cases, either because of censorship or government regulations on radio and television broadcasts, which is controlled even in the United States. They just don't have access to it. And that is the unfortunate situation for a lot of these countries, and even in the US for a lot of Spanish media. On that point, Epic Times has Spanish language media. You can watch Crossroads in Spanish. They dub me. It's really funny if you want to watch it. If you want to watch me speak Spanish, I'm not even joking. Watch me speak Spanish. Go to our Spanish language Crossroads. We have it. So you can watch Crossroads in Spanish, right? Let's see here. Last question. James Dyson, you're saying, how about all the fossil fuels that we were required to deport? How about all the fossil fuels that will be required to deport all of the illegal aliens, right? Yeah, airplanes and such. What does the left have to say about that? Or is that okay because Donald didn't have to deport the people because they aren't breaking the law? Well, flying them into the United States was very complicated, right? Because a lot of people were saying, gee, you're all against us flying in airplanes and driving cars, but you have no problem busing and flying all these people into the country. The argument from the other side is the way the United Nations framed this program of mass migration is they referred to them as climate migrants. The argument was that these were people fleeing the effects of climate change. And while they argued that, yes, they're flying people in, they're busing people in, that's a lot of fossil fuels, it is for the greater good, which is protecting people from the effects of climate change. That was the legal argument made at the United Nations level in terms of facilitating things like the Global Compact on migration and other things. The other side of it is they're like, well, what about deporting people? Doesn't that cost money? You will probably hear them use that argument. Trump wants to burn trillions of pounds or trillions of gallons of gas to deport everybody. This is a climate emergency. You'll probably hear that too. We're not yet at the point where the deportations are large enough to really hit the soft parts. We'll see. The other wild card in all this is, look, Trump has a lot of the Latino vote. A lot of Latinos are conservative. Most of them are Catholic. You have a lot of Catholics. They're very religious. A lot of them do not support the really far left stuff. A lot of them coming from countries like Guatemala and wherever they come from. A lot of them are fleeing the effects of socialism and basically poor crime enforcement, poor law enforcement. They're coming from countries that have been ravaged by gangs and by bad socialist policy. And so when they come here, they're not necessarily aligned with the far left. The challenge Trump will face with deportations will not only be just the logistics of being able to do it. It will also be the effect you have if, your Trump-supporting uncle, who's a hardcore Republican, gets deported, or your cousins get deported, and maybe you're a Trump supporter. Will that change the way you vote? Because the reality is, look, my family on my dad's side. I have my sister-in-law is Mexican. Most of my cousins are half Mexican. I have a lot of Mexican family. I can tell you, every Mexican family in my family has some relatives who are illegal immigrants. I know them. We have friends who are illegal immigrants. I like them. They're fantastic people. It's a very delicate issue because it's been going on so long. And so it'll be a question of how Trump handles it, I think. I'm not saying I support one side or the other with this, but it'll be very delicate for Trump to handle because he also risks breaking the support he's gotten in these communities. And the other side of it too is a lot of the older illegal immigrants, like especially the Mexican illegal immigrants, they really do not like the new ones. They really don't like them, like really, really don't like them. So there's also the possibility Trump could just go after the gang members and the MS-13 and the Tren de Aragua and target all the people brought in by Biden, and he'll probably solidify a voting base among like the older illegal immigrants if he chooses to do that too. We'll see how he handles things. I don't know. But that's kind of where we're at right now. People are asking also, do I speak Spanish? I speak decent Spanish. I did partly grow up in Costa Rica, but I grew up way off the beaten track, and we didn't have a lot of people where we lived. It was the Osa Peninsula, like the very tip of it. We were right on the edge of the Osa jungle, like the deep jungle. So we didn't have a lot of people around us. So I didn't learn a lot of Spanish there. All right, folks, that said, thank you for joining us. Join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Always a pleasure with y'all. Please leave a comment, or leave a comment too. But like this video, share this video, help us get the word out. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.